Okay, girls, I wanted to show you ladies what I did to attach the, let me get it in the frame here so you can see. Hang on, I'll try not to make it easy. There we go. What I did before we're going to attach the skirt, the apron front to the skirt. Now you should have already taken your seam binding and gone all the way around all the edges, top, bottom, and sides of your apron skirt. That's what we finished in the last video. So, in order to apply your skirt front now, your apron top to your apron skirt, I'll get this right in a minute. What I did was I turned the bottom edge of the apron front up, the raw edge up. It's got the little notches and stuff. You're really not gonna need them, but because I'll show you exactly where to place it. But you want to turn it up 1/4 of an inch and iron it with your iron. Press it down, okay? And then we're going to be ready to attach it to your apron skirt, the top of your apron skirt. Okay, so when we come back, we're going to do that. Go ahead and press 1/4 inch all the way around. And when you get to the curve, just kind of make a little crease in the fabric as you're going around the curve. It doesn't have to be perfect by any means. Okay, so go ahead and do that step, and then we'll move on. Okay, now I have laid the apron top out flat. Remember, I just ironed the edge up, so you can see like my little smooth edge here. And then you're going to lay your apron skirt on top of that, and you're going to pin these two together. Now I want you to be sure and put the top of your pin down when you pin, and pin vertically and not horizontally. Okay, so you're going to want to put a pin. Now you're going to feel your edge through the fabric so you can know where to pin. So you want to pin your skirt about the top of the bias tape on the apron skirt should be about 1/4 inch, only 1/4 inch from the turned up edge of your apron skirt top. And then put your pins in horizontally. Okay? And because you're going to sew over those pins, and you're going to use your bias tape as a guide as you're sewing. Okay? So go ahead and pin your skirt and your apron skirt and your apron top together. Now when you get over here to the little tab area, see this area here? Okay, it's going to be about that far from the edge, right there. Okay, you can have this still little round tab, and that's where your apron straps will attach to the side of the apron at your right and left side. Okay, so go ahead and, let me set the camera back down. Go ahead and pin your apron skirt onto your apron top, and then we'll go on to the next. Okay, now you should have your skirt pinned on. Okay, I just want to explain something really quick. Okay, you can see here, I'm turning the apron over how I've got my turned up edge. Now, when we sew this on to the skirt, it is going to have a raw edge here. It's going to just have a little bit tiny raw edge here. We're going to sew 2 rows of stitching. So there will be a little bit of ravel, you know, when it's washed, but there's going to be 2 rows of stitching, so it is not going to ravel out. There will just be a little bit of a frayed edge where the apron fits on. Now, if you were to put bias tape along this edge, number one, it would be hidden. And number two, it would make it really thick right here where you have to like sew it on. And you can do it that way. There's no rule that says you can't, but it's just going to add too much bulk, and it's going to waste, about 3/4 of a yard of bias tape. And it's not really necessary. Having just a little rough edge on the back side of your apron is like no biggie at all. And if you look at some vintage aprons, on the back side, sometimes you'll see like some little edges. It's not gonna come out. It's not gonna, ravel or come apart from your top. It'll be fine, I promise. So you just want to make sure that you've turned up a generous 1/4 inch on the back with your iron and pressed it down. And then we're going to sew the, I'm going to get my machine off the floor. And we're going to sew this down, and I'm going to sew the skirt onto the top. And I'm going to put the first row of stitching right here underneath my bias edge will be the first row of stitching. Now you say, how big should my stitch be? Well, you don't want a tiny, tiny stitch. And then you don't want, the largest size stitch that's like a basting stitch. So I have mine set, I think, at 3. I think is a good size. So anyways, we're going to put 2 rows of stitching. Now right here where we gathered our skirt before we put our bias tape, these little areas here, if you've got like little gathering stitches, you can clip those now and pull them out if you haven't already done that, because the bias tape and all the rest of the stitching is going to hold those pleats into place, and so you don't need to worry about it. Okay? Now, after you stitch this on, this is the right edge of my apron. You're still going to have this little tab, and we're going to come back and we're going to start adding bias tape and go all the way up. I think let me check my pattern. We may just go all the way up to the armhole. I think before we put the bias tape on the top of our apron, we're going to add the straps on for sure. So now, if you will, take your apron to your machine and stitch right under this bias tape. Put your first stitch and then come back and stitch right up next to it. So you'll have 2 rows of stitching to attach your apron top to your apron skirt. Okay? So take that to your machine and do that, and then I'll be right back. Okay, I have sewn my apron skirt to my apron top. And I'm going to show you, this is what my row of stitching looks like. Can you see that? I don't know if this is going to come out right side up or upside down. But anyways, you can see my 2 rows of stitching below the bias tape. Okay? And then when you turn it over on the back side, got a bunch of strings everywhere. It's going to look like this. And there are going to be like some places where the fabric sticks up a little bit, and so you can trim that. But that's what my row of stitching looks like. Okay, doesn't have to be perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Okay, so then let me set my machine over here just a little bit. Okay, so then after you get 2 rows of stitching below your bias tape and your skirt is attached to your top, remove your pins. Now, there's going to be, your bias tape is going to flip up right here just a little bit. And if you want to tack that down with a needle and thread, you certainly can. That's not going to bother me, but if it bothers you, that's your option. You've already got 3 rows of stitching showing on here. So if you wanted to stitch back over this line of stitching on your bias tape, you can certainly do that. But I think that's going to make it look too messy. There's already 3 rows of stitching showing there where you've attached your skirt. So the fact that that like little edge like flips up a little bit does not bother me. But if that bothers you, you can certainly stitch it down. Okay, I'm going to remove my pins and clip all my, I don't know about where each of you live, but, you know, y'all know that I'm like in Middle Tennessee, and I tell you what, this week, we've had like some intermittent sunshine, but all it has done is rain, and it is pouring rain again this morning. So, I'm just about tired of it. It's either like hotter than Hades or raining. But such is life. August will be here soon, and we'll be wishing it would do something other than just be hot, right? Okay, so I'm trimming like all my loose threads from the back of my skirt and the front of my skirt, and because I'm OCD that way. And then we're going to go on to the next step, which is going to be the straps. Okay, so this is a good time to like pause your video if you need to like take a break and get another cup of coffee, or you know, just walk away from your machine for a few minutes. Okay, I will see you girls back in just. Okay, now we're going to put our straps on. I've already done this side, so I'm going to show you how I did it, and it reinforces the shoulder strap area. Okay, so matching up your notches, you want to put the right sides together, and your notch will line up. Make sure your fabric is even on both sides, and take it to your machine. You can pin it if you want to, but it's just a short distance you're going to, and you want to sew from side to side of your strap right below that notch. Okay, now it will look like this. There's my notch. Okay, now you take the fabric and you just kind of finger press it. Oh, I'm not in the screen, am I? Okay. Finger press it and make sure this is going like towards the apron bottom, okay? Just kind of finger press it down. Let me like get that string. I'm OCD about strings hanging. And then you just make a little pleat. Did you see how I do that? You just make a little pleat with the strap so that it covers that raw edge. If you want to trim that just a little bit, you can, but don't trim it much. Just trim it just a tiny bit. You want it, that seam, from that seam to the edge needs to be about 1/4 inch. Okay, and then take your fabric and just fold a pleat down like that. And again, just finger press it. Okay, now you're going to take it back to your machine and you're going to sew right along this edge. Okay, and then where it's folded, don't go past you could feel the edge, so just line your machine up, and you use your like the little V in your sewing foot, and so line up the edge of you can feel that like little lump of fabric over there. It's kind of like a French seam. Okay, so you're going to have 2 rows of stitching, one from here and then another one on this side from here, and it's going to look like this. Can you see that? And then on the back side, it's going to look like that. Can you see? And then that shoulder seam will be nice and strong. Don't worry about these raw edges because they're going to be covered in bias tape. Okay, so take your fabric over to the machine and do that. I'm going to trim this edge here. I missed it like a little. Okay, so I'm going to take this over here to my machine, and I'm going to sew, just sew that down. And then you will have your shoulder straps attached to the top of your apron. You want to sew right along the edge of that little pleat. Okay? Trim your thread. Put it back, and then sew right along that plate. Line up the notch in your zipper foot, and then come right down that pleated edge. It should just be a straight seam. I use my finger as a guide. And then, trim your thread. And then it looks like this. You've got two seams going down that plate. And then it looks like this on the back. All right, so now your straps are on. And we're going to go to the next step. Okay, now that we have our apron top attached to our apron skirt, we're going to finish, and we have our straps, we're going to finish applying the bias tape. So remember that you unfold one edge. I folded it over right here because this is where I'm going to sew it on to the corner of my apron skirt. Can you see that? So I just like folded it and then pinned it, and I have the edge of my bias tape right up to the edge of my apron top, and I'm going around that little tab where the strap is going to attach. Now this is like a really tight curve here, and if you can't get that sewn, the bias tape sewn on as smoothly as you wish, you can certainly sew it on by hand. It's just you're only got to sew on hand by hand about 6 or 8 inches if you want to do it that way. If you don't feel comfortable sewing it on and getting a nice round edge with your machine right there, because see, it's kind of a tight turn. And remember, you're going to sew, your seam is going to go on the crease where we've opened up that edge of bias tape. You're going to sew on to the crease, and then you're going to go all the way up and around the end of your strap, and then down the front. So there's a lot of bias tape to this project. I really didn't think about that when we first started. And remember, girls, I told you that I was just going to use this creamy off-white bias tape that I had on hand, but it was only 1/4 of an inch wide. Ladies, I'm telling you, do not use 1/4 inch bias tape. It will make you crazy. If I ever tell you, ladies, that I'm going to use 1/4 inch bias tape on a project, just go ahead and make an appointment for me at the Central State downtown, because it will this just about made me crazy. It's just too tiny and tedious to sew. Please, please, ladies, use 1/2 inch bias tape for this project. It's supposed to be fun and not drive you absolutely crazy. So, and I've been sewing bias tape on for almost 100 years. And it's too tiny. I mean, look how tiny this is. Look how tiny this is when you flip it over and you like don't want to go off the back side. It's just too hard. Use 1/2 inch bias tape. Okay, so I'm going to finish pinning this on to my apron, and I'm going to sew it completely on. We went through this bias tape thing when we put it on our skirt. So it will go, you know, from where you attached your skirt, the apron skirt, to the apron top. It will go all the way around. It will go all the way around your strap, around this tab, all the way across the front of your apron, all the way down the other side of the strap, back to the other corner of your apron. It will all be edged in bias tape. So that will take you a good little bit, and I encourage you just to take a break when you get to, you know, as you're like sewing this on, because that's, you know, a 1/4 mile of bias tape. And so, you know, just take it slow so that you're really happy, you know, with your finished project. Slow is the key here. But once that bias tape is on, other than adding our buttons and or snaps, whatever you like choose to use, and putting our pocket on, we're almost done. So this is the hardest part, certainly right here, is just finishing this bias tape around the top and strap of your apron. Okay, so I'll be back in just a few, and I'll show you my finished project. Okay, y'all, real fast, I just want to show you, because you're going to encounter this as you're adding your bias tape on. What you do when you get to the end of a piece of bias tape and you have to join it on to like a new piece of bias tape so that you have a continuous piece of bias tape on your project. Okay, so when you get to the end, this was my end piece, I folded it over, and then I matched up the raw edge to the raw edge of the folded piece, pinned it, and then just sewed across the two of the bias tape, and then just kept on going. Do you see that? This is the folded edge of where I ran out, and this is the new piece on top that I added on. You just match up the raw edges, just folding the old piece over, and then on the opposite side it'll look like this. Now I'll catch this edge here, this open edge, I'll catch this when I sew it on. But after it's like sewn on to your project, it's going to look like that on the edge. And it'll be added on there, okay? Not a big deal. Fold over where you run out, fold it over, put the raw edge of the new piece up to the edge of the folded. Open that side up, and remember you sew along that line where it was